Good afternoon, colleagues.
Hi, Nader Absin. Hi, colleagues.
Thank you.
Afternoon.
Okay,
How are you?
Uncle Metse, if you don't mind, just give me a signal when you think we can start.
Yeah, I still see a lot of people joining. I think maybe we can give just extra 5 minutes or so.
Okay, then we can start, say, 14:35.
Yeah, 13:45 would be better.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, Mark, we can hear you.
Okay.
Good morning from your side.
Great morning. Good afternoon.
Yes, you are loud and clear.
Great.
Mark, I
Yes.
think I'm not quite sure if it's you or somebody else. I think we are listening now to your chats, to what you're listening that side. You may mute maybe.
It's not me, but I'll go on mute. I'm in a quiet room.
Okay, Onks, can we start now?
Yep.
All right. Good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome to our webinar today. The focus of our discussion today is on advancing risk-informed development in SADC transboundary landscapes, with a particular focus on transfrontier conservation areas, as well as our river basins and the River Basin Organization itself. And welcome to every one of us. You see the screen that I'm sharing, the agenda. You know, when you ask the question like this, you expect at least one person to say, yes, we can see it. At least one. Then I know I'm not talking to myself.
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Okay, our program is as displayed on our screen. My name is Rabson Dlodlo. I'm with GIZ here in Gaborone, Botswana, and I've been delegated to moderate this session today. We will start shortly after this with some welcome remarks, which will include some highlights of the objectives of today's webinar from our project manager, the Climate Resilience and Natural Resources Management Program within GIZ here in Gaborone, Botswana. That will be followed by two key presentations. One by Dr. Christo Marey, focusing on scaling up ecosystem-based approaches to managing climate-intensified disaster risks in vulnerable regions of Southern Africa. That will be followed by a presentation on INFORM, the risk index, SADC sub-regional model opportunities for disaster risk reduction, integration in TFCAs and RBOs, which will be given by Mr. Mark Slezak. After that, we will have a question and answer session, which we will all be asked to participate by asking questions and making comments to the presentations and the discussions. And then we will close with some wrap-up and closing remarks from Mr. Joseph, who is a Regional Development Advisor with GIZ here in Gaborone as well. With that, just one or two logistical announcements that let us please try and keep our mics mute for as long as we are not on the platform or are not talking or presenting. As much as possible, let's keep our mics muted. And I would also kindly request that we please do note down our comments and questions so that we just open it up for question and answer and discussion at the time that's allocated for that. For now, we just listen to the presentations and then engage in the discussion at a later stage. With that, let me ask Mr. Achim Kress, project manager at GIZ, to give his welcome remarks. Over to you, Achim.
All right. Thank you, Rabson. So hello, good afternoon, participants, colleagues, partners. So it's my pleasure to welcome you today. My name is Achim Kress, currently interim team leader for the CNRM project, as long as Lisa Blanken, the original team leader, is on maternity and parental leave. From background, I'm forester and geographer and currently based in Lusaka with regular visits to the Botswana team. So today's webinar is convened under the theme Advancing Risk-Informed Development in SADC Transboundary Landscapes, Opportunities for TFCAs and River Basin Organizations. It's the fourth webinar on disaster risk reduction in transfrontier conservation areas within the ongoing SADC TFCA webinar series 2026 and part of the broader SADC TFCA program 2023 to 2033. So as we're all aware, TFCAs and transboundary landscapes are increasingly exposed to climate-related hazards, environmental degradation, biodiversity loss, droughts, floods, wildfires. You know it better than me, which all threaten the ecosystems, livelihoods, the tourism economies, socio-economic development, and the like. So we come here together to talk about strengthening that resilience, which is essential for the long-term sustainability of these landscapes. And today's webinar provides an important platform for such dialogue, for learning, and for exchanging of experiences to strengthening exactly that resilience. So now to the formal part. On behalf of our project, the Joint Action Nature Africa Climate Resilience and Natural Resources Management in the SADC Region project, which is commissioned by the German government and co-funded by the European Union and implemented by GIZ. It is my pleasure now to warmly welcome you all to this today's webinar. I would like to extend my sincere greetings to all SADC TFCA stakeholders, representatives from member states, colleagues from the SADC Secretariat, international, regional, and local partner organizations, researchers, practitioners, and GIZ colleagues who join us today. And of course, it's also my pleasure to thank sincerely all presenters, facilitators, the moderator, and the participants that you take the time to join us and contribute to this important conversation. Your continued management and collaboration remain critical in advancing the resilience and sustainability of TFCAs in the Southern African region. Thanks and welcome. And let's say, Rapsan, we declare this webinar is opened. Wishing you a successful webinar and engaging sessions. Thanks.
Yes, thanks, Akim. Thank you for the welcome remarks. I think we can move on to our first presenter. We just want to try and manage our time so that we have a little more time for discussions, questions, and comments. So I would like to invite Dr. Christo Marey. You know, you always given a whole list of credentials for our speakers, and some of it is so much that if I said all of it for these two gentlemen, it might end up being longer than their presentations themselves. But just briefly, Christo is a former chief director with the National Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment in South Africa. And during that time, he was responsible for all the workings that you know, at least for those that are familiar with the South African system. There's working for water, working on fire, working on working for wetlands, as well as working for the ecosystems program, which he was all involved in during that time. He now specializes in translating natural resources management and economic theory into practical application, focusing mainly on ecosystem services and ecosystem-based disaster risk management solutions, particularly focusing on nature-based solutions to our key disasters, which include drought, fires, and floods. With that, let me allow Christo to please take us through the presentation. Over to you, Christo, and welcome.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Christo.
Okay. Oops. Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm going to jump right in. Just to give you a quick introduction to my approach today. I've been working, I've been back very much involved in integrated wildland fire management. And I thought it would be a good idea to focus on wildland fire and utilization. And you'll see as I go through, it's about wildland fire as a function, but it's also much more than just wildland fire. It also deals with droughts and floods. I'm going to go straight into my presentation structure is understanding the impact of fire on land and land use management, fires in SADC. That is something that I've been working on the last 2 days on, which I found very interesting, and it would be wonderful to discuss this a little bit afterwards. Resource implications of integrated wildland fire management, the drivers of land degradation, disaster risk implication of unsustainable fire regimes, fire and utilization regimes, strategic planning and long-term management, and the guiding principles and strategic actions with some conclusions. So that'll be my presentation structure, and I'm going to try and run through it as I've only got 20 minutes relatively quickly. So I'm not going to stand still on too many on slides for too long. The first part of my presentation is understanding the impact of fire on land use management. And we come back to part of my introduction. Ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction in Southern Africa is largely around droughts, fires, and floods. Floods including landslides and those kind of things. But what's interesting about this little triangle is that we cannot do anything about droughts. We can manage land so that we try and push back the impacts of droughts, and the same applies to floods. But fire and utilization, you'll see I've added utilization to fire here, and we'll come back to that. As I've said, fire regimes we can manage, natural resource harvesting we can manage, but seasonal rainfall and drought cycles, nutrient cycles, soil formation, hydrological processes, plant competition, seed dispersal, migration and wildlife movement, and carbon cycling, we can't really impact, because can't manage. We can only manage them through natural resource management and harvesting and fire regimes. Now, fire regimes are aimed at key ecological principles. Fire intervals are not uniform nationally. They are biome specific, and I'm going to expand a little bit on that. And ecologically acceptable fire management fire intervals refers to species regeneration. They must allow for species to regenerate, fuel balances, woody or grass or the woody and grass equilibrium, soil protection, and biodiversity integrity. In fact, the last one should really be listed up right at the start. Now, this is a summary that I've taken of the biomes, just more or less the biomes that I looked at in Angola, Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Mozambique, South Africa, Eswatini, and Lesotho. And these are just general, not guidelines, rule of thumbs, the ecologically acceptable fire cycles. But one can't just take on these as a standard. Within these, there are longer and shorter intervals as such. But there are some interesting implications of what's happening. Now we're going to look at fires in SADC, and specifically in those countries that I've listed. And I've also shown here, just drawn circles around the big transfrontier conservation areas. And in those transfrontier conservation areas, we need to decide, or we need to consider the upscaling of climate smart land use management. And this map is a fire return map. On the right-hand side of the bar, you'll see very dark purple. In those areas over the last 20 years, since 2000 since the year 2000, fires have occurred in these areas 26 times. That means a fire is occurring at least once a year. And that's got implications. And in other areas, there's no fires. There's some, for instance, here in Lesotho, the fire return interval is 43 years, which is not possible. There must be something wrong with the data in that case. The data that I've used comes from earthmap.org, just to get an idea of fires and the implications of fire management on land degradation and utilization. First graph is, as you can see, there's about a 3-year interval of fire return cycle in Angola, Mozambique, and Zambia. And then in the other countries, it's a variety. Botswana had 2 major outbreaks here during between 2009 and 2013, and again between 2020 and 24. But the other countries are pretty much running at the same levels. Let's have a look at these levels. 33% of the country's fire-prone biomes. Now, in Angola, I think, if I recall correctly, I still wanted to put it in, the fire-prone biomes is about 75% of the country. Botswana, about the same. Eswatini, about the same. Lesotho is higher. Malawi, Mozambique, it's a bit lower. Namibia is obviously quite low, and South Africa, so is South Africa, because it's 2 dry countries. The Karoo and the southern parts of Namibia doesn't burn. But as you can see, Zambia, Mozambique, and Angola are all, on average, burning 33% of their countries. And that's why I've included this part here. This is mostly Biombo woodlands, and which needs to be considered. That to me, for Biombo woodlands, sounds too much, and one has to consider other implications. As we can see, in Angola, the fire return cycle is about 2.88 years, Mozambique 3, Zambia 2.81. Lesotho, for some reason, because I don't expect montane grasslands returns every 2 to 3 years, or ideally returns every 2 to 3 years. Then I think we need to look at fire return cycles that might be too long. South Africa, for instance, is 16 years on average. Namibia is 13 years in the fire-prone biomes. Malawi is 16 years. And what we will find with that is that it could have a lack of fire. And I'm going to get back to that. This is just a seasonal presentation of when do the fires take place, and they mostly take place between August, September, October in this area, which is nothing not unexpected, except for South Africa that will have some fires in January, February, and December because it's a Mediterranean system. So a quick look at the resource implications of integrated wildland fire. This is, unfortunately, my text is a little bit too small. This is a map that shows blobs of fire sizes that took place in 2021. As you can see, there were significant fires in 2021. 2022 was a light year. 23 was big again, 24 was big again, and 25 was a light year again. All I'm trying to say with this slide, or illustrate with this slide, is that your demand, your resource demands per year differs from year to year. And then what type of vegetation, this data is that I got this data from is not Earth Map. This comes from the Working on Fire program. Notandu, my colleague, I think who's also in the audience, she did this work for me. And as you can see, down here in the fynbos areas where you don't get regular burns like 2 and 3 year burns, but 10 to 20 year burns, the burns are relatively workload intensive, lots of person days, and all in these bottom areas, in the Mediterranean areas, the fynbos areas, you've got more. And then as you go, there are big blobs and there's a combination of small blobs in the grasslands. These areas are the grasslands. You'll see they are lots of small fires, and then up there are medium-sized in the savannas, in the dry savannas. Now now we come to this ecosystem-based adaptation to climate change. The drivers of land degradation and a susceptibility to climate change is land use practices, and I'm going to deal with all three of them: global environmental change and ecological processes. In South Africa at least, but what I've seen in Botswana and all the Southern African countries that I've visited, the tendencies is very much the same. You either lose vegetation cover and you get these. This is in the Eastern Cape, south of Lesotho. This is in Limpopo, just west of Botswana. This is this is in the Northwest Province here, also just west of Botswana, bush encroachment with sickle bush. And then down in the southern parts, major challenges with invasive alien plants. So you can either increase your biomass, your woody biomass, or you can decrease your woody biomass by not managing your land correctly. This is just an example of land use that impacts on land degradation. Too short grazing intervals, you end up with a big grass stuff, and you end up with nothing. And when your soil energy or your nutrients below the ground have been mined, if one could call it that, you get woody encroachment because the woody species outcompete the grass species. The second one, on top of that overgrazing, a colleague of mine, well, a whole team of colleagues at the South African National Biodiversity Institute has looked at the root growth of woody species under different levels of CO2 in the air, under controlled conditions down at Kirstenbosch. And the root system on the right of the picture is the highest levels of CO2, and the root system on the left is the lowest levels of CO2. What does that tell us? With the increased CO2 in the air, our woody species are just being fertilized, and they just grow faster and grow faster and faster. And the C4 grasses can't keep up. So it's not just overgrazing, it's also climate change that cause land degradation. And then the third one, fire, where there's a lack of fire and overgrazing and the increased CO2, you get bush encroachment, which is a severe form of land degradation and exacerbated, which is exacerbating droughts, especially considering climate change. Now, looking at the biomes that I looked at in that map in southern Africa, woodland degradation caused in the Miombo woodlands, loss of tree recruitment that we can expect with those short fire cycles, wood thickening when you don't have fire, and you get these pioneer grasses. In the savanna grasslands, 5 years often leads to woody encroachment. Again, lack of fire, lack of browsing, you get woody encroachment. And all these things have got a negative impact on the delivery of ecosystem services. In the Mopani woodland, too frequent fires reduces regeneration of Mopani. And as you can understand, this leads to soil erosion and ultimately also to water runoff and recharge. In the Kalahari woodland, too frequent fires, loss of mature woodland structure, and in the long fire cycles, severe fire risk. So that's disaster risk. And if you think about what I'm saying, we're talking about droughts and fires and droughts and access to grazing resources and other resources. And as you can see, the impacts are pretty much the same right across Southern Africa. And we need to consider this when we deal with disaster risk reduction, because it's not in the good years that the countries or the conservation, I've focused on the transfrontier conservation areas, it's not during the good years that there's a problem. It's during the dry years or the good years and then major fires because of biomass buildup in the year after the fires. Now, for example, the ecosystem services impacts of bush encroachment, the first one and the most severe one, you get 82%, and this is not a linear approach. As the bush encroachment increases, the grazing potential decreases. It doesn't happen that way. The grazing hangs in there until you've got canopy closure, and suddenly you lose 80% of your grazing potential in savannas. Trees modify the infiltration and root water uptake and reduce the duration of high soil moisture in the subsoils. This work was done in Namibia, and there were clear indications of severe impacts of bush encroachment on the delivery of ecosystem services, especially water security. Trees tend to reduce soil moisture for deep percolation by between 50 and 75%. Again, just imagine it's during the dry years that these things have got that kind of impact. Groundwater recharge is sensitive to vegetation transition and the impacts of bush encroachment. Higher fuel loads under extreme conditions will lead to more intense and dangerous fires. What we found with invasive alien plants is that they don't really burn intensively or intense under normal conditions. 24, 25 degrees centigrade, light winds, and not too high or too low air moisture. They don't burn. And then you get those perfect storms. Temperature higher than 30 degrees centigrade, wind higher than 30 kilometers per hour, and air moisture less than 30%. Then all hell breaks loose. And what we have to do is use fire and utilization in combination to open up certain areas and allow for proper utilization potential in the form of grazing in both in our conservation areas and our buffer areas. The strategic planning and long-term management, what needs to be considered, you have to have a long-term commitment. And this one has to consider within the transfrontier conservation areas, where countries across borders collaborate in a long-term, ongoing approach to land management. Holistic land management, improved grazing management, periodic fires and browsers, monitoring encroachment, and community involvement and extension. That's if we want to upscale conservation and resilience to climate change, we need to collaborate. The potential contribution of TFCAs, large TFCAs should sort conservation areas into separate regions, each region being one in which the fire danger is usually sufficiently uniform to allow for a single rating. Fire danger rating systems must consider the relevant peculiarities of each region, consult with other organizations. There are some of our universities right across the countries that I've focused on that has done excellent work on land management. We should access those knowledge, and TFCA authorities can consider a loan or grant or other assistance to any fire protection association. And I'm using the word fire protection association here because in South Africa, we've got a fire protection associations. It's a voluntary association, but it's a legal person. And if one access, for instance, climate funding, a fire protection associates, a legal entity, can access funding international and locally, and TFCAs have got a role to play in that process. Some guiding principles when we look at integrated wildland fire management, and this just if you apply what I'm going to present to you now, you'll see it all feeds into the aspects that I've discussed earlier on. Sustainable livelihoods, human health and security, traditional uses of fire, using to rejuvenate grazing, etc., protecting lives and assets, economic impacts in terms of damages to economic infrastructure, interactions between climate change and fire effects of ecosystems. I've discussed that, legislation and governance. Again, the TFCAs can not legislate necessarily, but can govern the behavior of the land users within the transfrontier conservation areas. It has to have a multi-stakeholder, and in the TFCAs, a multi-country approach. You cannot do it without cooperating it, and knowledge transfer is key. The strategic actions that's needed for integrated wildland fire management, fire resource management, fire management and natural resource protected areas. We need to focus on those and then have a buffer effect, or what do you call it? They call it a cofferdam effect, where things spill over from the core areas into the buffer areas. Fire awareness and education, fire prevention, fire danger rating system, fire preparedness, including technical training. This is highly, very, very important, and the knowledge is there. If I could say, I think South Africa can offer some of that knowledge right across the Southern Africa. We're working on fire program that was mentioned earlier, and the program that I'm involved with at the moment as a lot of knowledge, and there's a lot of knowledge around to improve. Pre-fire season activities, fire detection, communications and dispatching, initial attack, large fire suppression and management, and then fuel load management. Fuel management is critically important to minimize your fuel loads when the extreme fires happen. Prescribed burning is an important aspect of fuel load management, fire belts and so forth, burnt area restoration. If you don't allow your land to degrade too much, you don't need restoration. You simply need the land to rest. And then monitoring and assessment across after the fires. What's important to remember is optimum fire return intervals, as I've already mentioned and raised my concerns about. Optimum season of burn. It seems like the fires are basically burning in the right seasons. And then fuel load, felt age and vegetation type. Again, the versus the too often burning versus too long fire cycles, and with the long fire cycles having those huge fuel loads. This is just a picture of bad fuel load management. 90,000, 91,000 hectares burning in one area and one in the Western Cape. And this is not what we want, at least in the modern era. And the same, not managing fuel loads in the urban wildland interface, or let me rather say the developed zone urban interface, you get economic damage. Some quick conclusions. Fuel loads need to be managed as part of integrated wildfire management. Integrated wildfire management cannot be looked at in isolation. We need to look at it from the perspective of droughts and floods and soil movement and biodiversity and agriculture, especially with Southern Africa's informal settlement challenges. We must be innovative. Climate change is posing threats, but also presents some opportunities. Integrated natural resource management is critically important, especially fires, invasives, and development. Fuel loads could be a threat, but also an opportunity. When I say that, I'm talking what we call value-added industries, where some of that, and Namibia is a very good example, where bush encroachment is being restored, or grasslands are being restored by clearing swartak, blackthorn, and making charcoal out of it. Now there's a big drive in South Africa with making biochar and working the biochar back into the ground, into the soil. I'm working on a project in Limpopo, the Waterberg Biosphere Reserve, where we're doing that. There's a tripartite relationship needed. The land users, and you'll see in the whole presentation, I'm using the word land users rather than land owners, because there are different. Apologies, I just want to. There's conservation agencies. They are a land user. Farmers are land users. Communities are land users. Traditional leaders. There must be a relationship between the land users, local authority, and the TFCAs. Through innovative partnerships with the private sector, national and provincial government, and local authorities, integrated natural resource management programs can contribute to economic development. Some practical steps to be taken. Fuel load management should be taken more seriously. Prescribed burning must become standard practice. Wild and urban interface should be assessed. We cannot afford massive invasive alien plant fuel loads in fire-dependent systems. And lastly, just the conditions, my views, and this is purely my views, this is not based on any science, it's my experience. Community ownership of a project is critical. If you don't have community ownership, it's not going to work. Some government and TFCA support and guidance is needed. Value-added industries, as I've already alluded to, could be a major positive towards restoring land. Ecological sustainable fire regimes is critical. Follow-up treatment of restored areas and land user compliance with sustainable grazing regimes and rest periods. This needs to be considered. I once, and I'm not a rangeland ecologist, but I once spent some time in the field up in the Drakensberg. And I asked one of our better rangeland ecologists in South Africa what she thinks is the key to sustainable grazing. And she used one word: rest. If you look at the savory model, if you look at all the grazing models that you can find, all of them talk about rest periods, and that's so critical. And we need to, the TFCAs have got a role to play in ensuring that a proper grazing regimes is being implemented. And as I've mentioned earlier on, access to the carbon market, possibly through biochar from bush encroachment, is definitely something to consider. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't go over my time. Just to show that I did use a whole series of references which I didn't necessarily refer to in each slide.
Thank you very much, Christo. I think that was a very insightful presentation. Obviously, from your introduction about the control that we have on fire, among the other risks that we face. And I think the important message, that one of the key messages that comes out is that, fire management needs to be taken into a broader context of climate change and our ability to manage and get some form of resilience against that. And thank you very much for that. On a lighter note, Christo, I think it's probably your third from last slide, where you meant to say tripartite. You ended up saying tripartite.
I must check it.
But thank you very much for that. I think let's move on to Mark's presentation. Once again, I'll just be very brief on Mark's credentials. Like I said, it could be a presentation on its own, but Mark is a humanitarian professional working at the intersection of data design and frontline response, and has extensive operational experience supported by information design and strategic evaluation expertise in conflicts and natural disasters, and has worked for a wide range of NGOs, as well as the International Organization for Migration, the UN organization, as well as the US government, particularly focusing on support for relief efforts in a number of countries, including a good number of African countries. But Mark, welcome, and over to you now. Thank you. Mark, you seem to be talking, but we can't hear you unless I'm the only one. Colleagues, am I the only one who can't hear Mark? I can see he's talking.
I can't hear him either.
Possible that he probably can't hear us either. Let me see if I can just put a note for him.
He seemed to be actively speaking on the other side, but we can we just see the photo, the video.
Okay, let's hope he can see that note. Okay, he says he will re-enter the meeting. So please bear with us. Let's see how far we can go with that, and hopefully let's give him a few more minutes and see.
While we wait, Rapson, while we wait, Rapson, I was very interested linking the rest periods for grazing with the wildlife migratory corridors and managing that in some aspect that's part of the benefit you get from this wildlife migratory systems. I think we'll reflect on that as we get to discuss.
Thanks, Onks. Mark seems to be back. Can you try it now, Mark?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, great. I am trying to share my screen and I don't see availability to share the screen like before. I'm going to.
Don't you see it at the bottom of the screen, Mark?
It's not. It doesn't show up for me because I joined from the browser instead of Zoom because there's obviously something wrong with my Zoom. I'm going to try again. Otherwise, would you be able to share the presentation that I sent?
Onks, do you happen to have the presentation? If you do, can you please try and share from your side? Let's see.
Yeah, I'm working on that. But Mark, just try it again. I've just added you as a co-host, not just a participant. Try see if you can share now.
Okay, how's this? Can you hear this?
Yes, we can hear you, but we can still see you, so we are not seeing the
Great.
presentation yet.
Okay, let me reshare the presentation now. Okay. Great. How's that?
Something seems to be coming up. Yes, we've got
Okay,
it.
great. Okay, so this is the Index for Risk Management. It is a global collaborative of UN, NGO, governments, and technical organizations, academia, that brings together many data sources for risk analysis related to disasters. So I'm going to talk about the methodology and explain the model that's been recently put in place for SADC member states, and then talk about some ideas for potentially using this for TFCA issues. On the methodology, Inform is really about people and community coming together to discuss data for disaster preparedness. So this is one of our workshops. We had 3 workshops already, and one more is coming in Zambia. This is the South Africa one. So it's really a community effort from SADC member states, GIZ, and donors. I'll play a video of an introduction.
Mark, I don't think the volume is coming out. We can see movement of the pictures.
See it? Okay. All right, never mind. I'll just drop the link in the video. It was playing on my side, but I'll send the link later. Okay, so let's go on to the different products of Inform. So there's the risk model of Inform. There's an early warning product about disasters. And there's a climate change model that we're not talking about today. And there's a severity model once a disaster happens. So they're all parts of this Inform partnership. So how it works is that there are around 80 indicators in 3 different dimensions: hazard and exposure, vulnerability, and lack of coping capacity. And then all those are segmented into natural and human hazards, socioeconomic and vulnerable groups, and institutional and infrastructure. And then underneath that is all the different data, the 80 indicators. And they all work together into a composite indicator sheet that comes up with a risk ranking score from 0 to 10, 0 being very low risk of disasters overcoming the capacity, and 10 being high risk of disasters overcoming the local capacity and requiring external support. So there's a global model and there's different subnational models. For the SADC model, we kept the dimensions and categories the same, and we adjusted the components specifically to SADC member states. This composite indicator approach brings up the raw data into components, categories, dimensions, and finally an overall score for each admin area. So there are different regional models, and then within the countries there are models. This is a little bit different than other risk models because it's totally from open data. It covers the full area of SADC. It's totally open source, so there's no hidden or proprietary data. That makes it transparent, and we keep it updated, and it's flexible in that we can adjust it to make it work. For each model, we do a consultation workshop, data collection, processing, calibration, validation, and handing over the model. So we are at the very end of that now. We have all the different administrative boundaries at admins level 1 and 2 that the data comes into. And then we have our own framework that talks about the specific indicators that were decided by SADC member states that should be in the model in a 2023 workshop. I have some slides here to show the different sources of data. So you can see there are natural hazard sources from the UN. There's Global Forest Watch there, NOAA, many different sources. The human hazards come from the Armed Conflict Location Database and the Heidelberg Institute and the Joint Research Commission. Vulnerability data comes from different online sources. And the vulnerability and capacity scores come from a mix of UN sources and World Bank. So the result of all this is simply a spreadsheet. Okay, so if you have the spreadsheet open, everyone can have a copy of this and have a link to it. This is each SADC member state here on the left with the results of risk between 0 and 10 in the final results. So you can see we have coastal hazards, drought, earthquakes, etc. here. All those roll up into a natural disaster score. And there's the human disaster of conflict intensity, conflict risk, hazardous materials, and internal violence. And that rolls up into a human hazard score. And then there's a combined human and structural and a natural disaster hazard score. The same thing happens for the vulnerability scores here. We have habitat, economic dependency, livelihoods, etc. All those come together into an overall vulnerability score that's at each admin location. And then we have, on the capacity side, we have healthcare access, economic capacity, water and sanitation, all that goes into an infrastructure score. And then we also have an institutional score around governance and DRR implementation. And then all that comes together into a coping capacity score. And then you have the final results of composite risk here on the right. So it can seem a little bit complicated at first, but it's actually very simple. In this spreadsheet, it's not a fancy database, it's just a spreadsheet. So we have all the different data sources listed here. We have the raw data that goes into these two tabs. And then it gets transformed, it gets processed into a score from 0 to 10. And then it goes into the overall result here that we were looking at before. So that's a little bit how it works. Once you have the data, you can do interesting analysis with it. So here's a picture of a dashboard that uses the results for different locations. So this is the overall risk score for all the countries in SADC. So you can see the variations in risk. Mozambique being highest because very high here because of the combination of cyclones plus the Cabo emergency. In Madagascar here, you see the cyclone risk combined with extreme poverty and vulnerability that makes it high. And then you have like lower risk kind of on the continental mainland here. And so you can see the results. And then once you have them, you can do different kinds of maps and charts. This is looking only at the hazards. That was the combined risk. This is the hazards, specific hazards. And then this is the vulnerability map. And the coping capacity or lack of coping capacity scores here, places with the least capacity. So you see, South Africa in the southern parts, much more capacity than a place like DRC, for example, according to the data. Okay, so a few ideas about ways to use this for the TFCA. I know that it's not specifically built for you, but it does show areas that are most at risk of humanitarian crisis. It has, you can see about droughts and floods, where they've occurred in the past, and you can see vulnerability scores to show where people might need help or be more at risk when you're dealing with resource management. Other ideas are around spatial planning and corridors, overlaying hazard and exposure maps with biodiversity data. That's not done yet, but that could be something to be done. Community resilience, using the vulnerability indicators to target socioeconomic support to areas of intense human-wildlife competition, for example. That's something you could do immediately with the data that's already there. Harmonizing risk metrics across borders to create a standard shared risk and joint operational disaster management plans. And that's really one of the strengths of this, is that it's not just one country. A lot of these tools are separate, and we've put something in place that's completely regional and comparable across the region. So it's a very good starting point for analysis and planning. And then finally, evidence-based financing. If you're trying to decide where a project goes, having a data-driven justification for where people are the most at risk, where people are the most vulnerable, can help get money for different projects. So if you wanted to do more with this, you could just use it as it is now. I'll send you all the links. GIZ has all the copies and everything. You could just use it as it is and kind of look at it in relation to your TFCA issues. But if you wanted to adapt it, you could put more conservation-specific data into the model. There's we want it to be adapted and evolved for different uses. So it does take some time and money to do that, but it is possible to adjust it, to adapt it for TFCA-specific data if that's something that you want to do in the future. Okay, that's everything that I have. Thank you, and back to the moderator.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you for sharing an important tool with us, at least a tool that gives us some very quick information on what we may need to do where priority areas that we can then start working more intensively on. And without wasting a lot of time, let's open this for questions and comments. We have less than 10, 15 minutes now. So let's make our questions short and precise. Okumete, please help me identify any hands, and also let's just monitor the chat box for any questions there. Any questions, comments? And Mark has just shared some of the links on the chat. So we please can just take note of those. Do I assume that there's no questions and comments? We are all happy?
Sorry, Chair. I was trying to find the place where I put up my hand. Mark, I didn't see. I'm specifically interested in, obviously, with natural resource management. I'm very much interested in water security, both in the landscape and obviously access. Have you got? Yeah, I was there. Obviously, drought.
Yeah, specifically on water security, we have coastal hazards, we have drought, we have general environmental degradation, flood, and then, but that's it. We don't have anything beyond those specific things.
Okay.
And again, like this is the limitations of a model. This is about disasters specifically. So, yeah, that's what you could do. If you wanted to add data to the model, is basically, we would insert a column here that had, water security data into it. And then it would show up in relation to all the other things. We do have a water sanitation and hygiene score, access to wash services there. So that's tangentially related, but it would have to be adjusted to include data from that.
Okay. Something that can be used if one looks at water in the landscape, which is it's very important for ecosystem services. Bring this as a tool to add value to the water in the landscape.
Okay, thank you very much, Christopher, for that comment. I see a hand from, okay, let me just say Koti.
Yes, thank you very much.
Koti, please go ahead.
Can you hear me and see me?
Yes, we can hear you, we can see
Perfect.
you.
Hi, yeah, my name is Davide Cotti. I'm a social academic officer at UNU EHS in Bonn, and I work in a division called GLOMOS. We do mountain research, and I have a background in drought research, and I did some work also on SADC. So I'm very happy to be here today, learning a lot. I have a question that hopefully brings together a bit the two presentations. So I'm familiar with Inform. I was wondering if you have ever considered a validation of Inform or an application that goes a bit more in the sub-national level, but also the sub-community level. So, for instance, mountain communities we know might have different reasons of why they're vulnerable. They also might have different priorities in terms of hazards and why certain hazards should contribute more to their overall risk. And this brings it together with the first presentation where we heard that community ownership is actually very important for all these type of research and projects. So I was wondering if there's any insight of validating Inform and maybe rebuild it from scratch at the community level and in specific environment like mountains could be. Thank you very much.
Yeah, interesting question. So when we make a model like this, we are looking at the lowest possible administrative level that we can get data for. So this is Malawi at that administrative level 2. And so we don't, the limitations of our model is that we don't go down to the community level. Theoretically, that would be possible if we were able to get data that would be detailed enough and have full coverage across the complete area to allow for this kind of analysis. So the methodology can go as granular as possible, but usually, and in the case of this, we're limited by the granularity of the data that covers the whole SADC region, for example. But even at the country level, I was just in Madagascar last week. There's a specific model for Madagascar, and even there, the data doesn't exist all the way down to the community level. It's just not collected at that detailed level for enough coverage to make a valid risk map. You can still do great ad hoc work with each community, people understanding their own specific risks and developing their own plans. That's very important, and that's happening in various ways. But as far as an overall comprehensive risk model, we don't have that level of detail in place yet. And this is really more for that kind of transboundary, bigger picture planning type stuff. It's just not geared to do that really detailed community level stuff, which is super important, but just not a good perfect fit because of the data limitations. Over.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
The smallest.
Yes,
So
Crystal,
if I could
go ahead.
just respond. The smallest, and this is in the South African context. It's very difficult to deal with integrated wildland fire and droughts at a community level because it's multiple communities that are being impacted. The smallest administrative unit in South Africa for wildland fire is fire protection associations and obviously local authorities, but I'm not aware of any access to community level data that can support this kind of decision making.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other question? If you have a question and you may not be able to raise your hand, please just go ahead.
Yeah, I have one
Maybe-
other observation on that question, which is that I was in Madagascar last week, and when we did present this model to local disaster responders from the government and from the Red Cross, people who only work in their one town, and they don't think about national issues. They only think locally about their risk, and it does have some utility to look at how the risk in that place compares to overall risk in the rest of the country, but that's not their job to think about the whole risk. And so it did kind of seem to have limited utility when you were just dealing with somebody who lives in this one small coastal town that just got hit by a major cyclone, a few months ago. And their concerns are so much more immediate about cyclone shelters and backup generators and food, electricity access, and their local grid just being totally destroyed. Then, we can make a picture of what that risk is, but their kind of operational on the ground needs are so much more pragmatic and immediate that I think you almost need like a different product that's more about just those like pragmatic things, almost like a checklist for really specific things. So over.
Thanks, Mark. There is a question on the chat box from Marcus. It reads as follows. Risk is now understood as being multidimensional and systemic, with high levels of interdependency, feedback loops that transcends sectors and stakeholders. How does inform increase understanding of systemic risk? I think that's a question to you, Mark.
Yes. Right. This, in some ways, our model is super basic, right? You have the spreadsheet, you have the composite indicators that link up in this. That link up, from the bottom, you have your raw data, it goes into the components, it goes into categories, dimensions, and then the final score. When you're looking at the final score, you're getting a combination of all the factors. So I think Inform does, in answer to like your multidimensional question and systemic, our way of thinking about that is by saying all these things combine basically with equal. Our assumption is that they combine with basically equal weighting. Inform is unweighted. It's just whether the data is in the model or not. And so it rolls up together. All the hazard data rolls up into a natural hazard score. All the conflict data rolls up into a human score, and that goes into an ultimate hazard score. So if you were trying to look at the specific interconnections, we treat that by just combining them in an equal weighted model that shows how they stack against each other, rather than some kind of like more complex feedback loop type of modeling. And I think what is good about Inform is that it does transcend sectors and it does transcend stakeholders, in that this model does bring together 80 different indicators, and it's not about one sector, it's not about one actor or stakeholder. It is just the available data that we have. And then, and David's question about the direction of the prioritization. Yeah, it's great for prioritizing, like the people who, in the Madagascar example, is there anybody from Madagascar on the call? In case they are, please speak up. But in the Madagascar example, this thing is really useful for the people in Antananarivo, right, at the capital level, who are looking at overall risk and managing everything. It's way less useful for the people, in that small town on the coast in Full Point, who, are hit by these mega storms. Like they need, shelters and generators, and the familiarity of their knowledge about their risk in relation to every other place in Madagascar is way less important, because they're only in this one small town and they need to take a much more pragmatic approach. So the background data is good, but it's much more about operational kind of checklists and community level planning, because we know these mega storms are gonna be hitting them, and so they have to be ready.
Right, thank you very much, Mark, for that response. I see two hands on Kemetse first, and then Achim after that, and then there is another question on the chat, and of course there is one person who says they are familiar with Madagascar. But on Kemetse and then Achim.
Thank you very much, Rapsin. Mine, I've said it earlier on. I just wanted to engage Christo further on, when you talk with TFCA's colleagues and stakeholders, most of the important issues to them is, the wildlife, movements and spaces versus the community spaces where they have livestock also. And now we see a rise in these human wildlife conflicts because of, managing these two species or systems together. So I was very interested in picking from the ecosystems based approaches that Christo was talking about, to say, well, how can we really get into the TFCA set on those and advise further. I think mine is just about that. Thank you much.
Thanks very much for that comment. Yes, it's actually quite a simple thing. Your rest periods, you need migrations to facilitate rest periods in nature. You need migrations. And as a result of migrations, you might end up in human-wildlife conflicts. And managing that is a challenge. What we do have to consider, though, is that those migrations, we cannot deny it, that tourism is a very relevant, especially for us in SADC, a very high value land use. And if we can combine tourism with natural migrations, and manage that conflict between wildlife and urban livelihoods, we can have the best of both worlds. And that's why, in my view, transfrontier conservation areas are so important.
Thank you, Christo. Achim, please go ahead.
Yes, thanks. Thank Christo. And what was your name, second presenter?
Mark.
Mark. Yes, thanks for the presentations. Very interesting. Let me ask a critical question. I think we have one participant missing in this webinar. That's nature itself. Because if we look at disaster risk management, we always have the perspective of the human being. The moment we enter into an ecosystem and some disaster strikes, then it is a disaster for the human being. If we would have nature here among us, they would say the disaster is the human being encroaching into my ecosystem, causing wildfires, causing destruction, etc. So where exactly are your recommendations for the TFCAs and for those stakeholders when we talk about nature conservation, corridor management, and the like? What would nature do to mitigate the risks from human beings? Yeah, and where do we as human beings need to renegotiate our relationship with nature? Where eventually, if the disasters are getting too much, where do we have to withdraw, right? Not putting more firefighters into the system, but where we have to withdraw people from the ecosystems to allow nature being by its own. Yeah. So that's would be an interesting theoretical concept, looking at the two topics from the nature's perspective, from the nature's view.
Thank you, Achim. Any one of you good gentlemen?
If I could respond with regards to nature, you're 100% correct. It's actually, we should sit with red faces. What did the CEO of the IUCN said in 1991? Your Homo sapiens has been such a successful species that it's now totally out of control. And I think from a nature perspective, at least as far as fire is concerned, an adaptive interference approach is incredibly important. When it comes to migrations and all those kind of things, we need to be able to adapt to ecological processes. And for that, we need to understand those ecological processes. We've got a relatively good idea of fire ecology, but there are other ecological processes that we don't have as good an idea of as fire ecology. And we are causing major disasters. Just the bee disasters, the recent impacts on bees and bee populations dropping through the bottom and all those kind of things. Nature, I hope we can find a way of giving nature a voice. Maybe we can do it through AI.
Good.
Okay. Thank you very much, Christo. Just to wrap up, there is a couple of comments from Koti, and I think we can just take note of those. But there is one from Henry that is the first presenter mentioned that for the risk reduction strategies to work properly, community must be at the center. How best can the community be at the center if decisions are made at national level? Any quick comment to that, Christo?
In South Africa, there are your fire protection associations, which is a legal entity. They represent community interests. So, in that sense, in some places in South Africa, communities are well represented. In other places, they're not that well represented. With regards to, and I can't speak with too much knowledge about other countries, but your community-based natural resource management initiatives in Namibia, which I know are very successful, the historical ones in Zimbabwe, that is the kind of platform. And as part of my presentation, I just used the word committees. But what I had in mind was like community-based natural resource management platforms and those kind of things. So local NGOs can definitely play a role and should play a role in integrated wildland fire management. And it was a very good comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christo. Colleagues, allow me to end this here and ask Mark and Christo to just please take note of, while Onkemetse is giving us closing remarks, if you can just take note of the further comments by Koti, Marcus, and Haley. And if possible, if you can just follow up on those, just to, if you can, please just provide some responses and comments to those questions. But now allow me to hand over to Onkemetse Joseph to give us some closing remarks technically in a minute. Thank you. Onks, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rapsin, and I want to thank all of our speakers, starting with Akim and Christo and Mark. This is an ongoing work that we are trying to really promote integration of disaster risk management into sectors. This is not only the GIZ, the German interest, it's the SADC Secretariat and SADC member states' interest to really find all stakeholders sharing the role of disaster risk management. We see how our development gains are being affected and limited because of disasters that we could really work on and address while on development planning. So the key message is risk-informed development. How do we make sure we start we start taking note of the risks to our development and the risk from our development while really at planning stages. So that's the key message. I want to close by really emphasizing that this platform, the SADC TFCA webinar series, is continuing. We will be having the next webinar that will be hosted by Sustainable Finance Coalition on 26 May. That will be talking much of nature markets in practice. The other one you have to look out for is also from us, GIZ, talking about wildlife-based economy and the peer-to-peer learning report back on June, around 23rd of June. So let's keep looking on those invitations and come and share experiences and participate. And we thank you all for participating, for always coming to our dialogue sessions to share experiences. Thank you very much. And I think thank you, Rapsen, for the good moderation. That's all for me. Thank you.
Okay, from me, thank you very much to everyone that participated. Onkemetse has given the closing remarks, so all I can say, thank you to you all presenters and participants particularly. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.